Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Survive and Thrive event, the last one for this year of challenges that has been 2020. This evening's event is entitled Find a Way, What Endurance Athletes and Barristers Can Learn from One Another. We're very lucky indeed to have as our speaker for this evening, Will Murray, who joins us today from Boulder, Colorado in the US of A, where I believe it is 1 minute past 11 in the morning, I think. Good morning, Will.
Good morning.
Will is a certified USA triathlon coach who specializes in mental conditioning for endurance athletes, particularly triathletes. He's co-author of The 4 Pillars of Triathlon, a book which explains how imagination, motivation, discipline, and recovery are the vital mental skills that athletes must cultivate in order to perform at their best. And over the years, I know that he's helped very many endurance athletes laser in on how to use their minds to enhance their athletic performance with truly amazing results. Now, I'm sure that I'm not alone in feeling that certain trials really are endurance events, demanding all of one's reserves of stamina, resilience, determination, and so on. And in fact, personally, when in trial, I certainly seem to eat like an endurance athlete, indulging in some essential carb loading beforehand, courtesy of pret-a-manger. And yeah, I think I've also been known to have a glucose pouch at lunchtime to get through the afternoon's proceedings. But leaving aside the blood sugar levels and slow release carbs, I'm really looking forward to finding out what mental techniques Will teaches to his athlete clients to help them really get the best out of themselves on race day, and learning how those techniques can be applied to what we do, what legal practitioners do. But before I hand over to Will, a few words, if I may, about questions from you. I think you've probably already been told that there will be an opportunity for questions after Will's presentation, and we'll be taking those via the chat function. Will has said that he would absolutely love to hear any questions that you have, and has suggested that you type them in the chat box as they occur to you rather than waiting for the Q&A. He may have a few words to say on this as well. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And when it comes to the Q&A, I'll ask your questions. So please do write down whatever you want to ask. So without anything further, Will, over to you.
Well, Beatrice, thanks for having me. I appreciate everybody here in your dinner hour. We'll try to make this snappy. A quick story. I was in New York City some years ago getting ready for an Ironman race there. And an Ironman race is a swim and then a bike and a run all together, strung together in the same day. And my wife and I were in a taxi, and the taxi driver asked, what are we doing in New York City? We said, we're here for a race. He goes, well, it's a running race? We said, yeah, kind of. He goes, what do you mean kind of, like a 5K? We said, no, it starts out with a swim. And he says, a swim? Where do you swim? We said, well, we swim in the Hudson River. He goes, my God, you swim in the Hudson River. How far, like 100 yards? We said, no, it's 4,200 meters. He says, you swim, my God, you swim 4,200 meters in the Hudson River, and then you have your little run, right? We said, no, actually, after this one, there's a bike portion. And he said, where do you bike? And we said, well, we bike up and down the parkway here. And he goes, what, like 5 miles or something? We say, no, actually, after the 4,200 meter swim, we bike 112 miles. He says, my God, you swim 4,200 meters in the Hudson River, and then you bike 112 miles up and down the parkway, and then you have your little run, like 5K or something, right? We say, no, actually, it's a marathon. And he says, my God, you swim 4,200 meters in the Hudson River, and then you bike 112 miles up and down the parkway, and then you run 26 miles. And then he shook his head and said, how much do they pay you for this? we burst out laughing because no. The direction of cash flow goes in the other direction. We pay them. And he said, well, how much? And we told him, and he burst out laughing. And then as we're driving along about 5 minutes later, he burst out laughing again as he replayed this whole thing in his head over again. So the one thing we know for sure that is common to barristers and endurance athletes is non-compos mentis. That's the one thing that we have in common right off the bat. You kind of have to be crazy to do either of these things. And it does take a lot of advanced preparation when you're getting ready for a trial or you're getting ready for a negotiation. You have to be ready, and you have to prepare in all the ways you have to prepare to do this, just like you were for a race. You have to do your running and your swimming and your bicycling and your strength training and stretching and all that stuff. And before you go into a trial, you have to make sure that you've got, you know, your strategy all lined up. You've got your witnesses prepared. You have your legal defense, your legal team with you. You've got to make sure you've got all your motions mapped out and all those things, because on race day, the race is going to happen. If the race is beyond December 16th, the race will happen whether you are prepared or not. And there's a trial date set, and the trial is going to happen unless you get a continuance on that day, and you will be ready or not. And when you walk into the courtroom, everybody's going to be there, and you have to be ready. So those things, you know, you have in common. Another thing you have in common is they can be grueling, as Beatrice talked about. You know, you have to be on all the time. You have to be paying attention. You have to be thinking a couple steps ahead. And we know for sure that thinking is expensive. Your brain is about 3% of your body weight and uses 30% of the glucose. Your brain is a real energy hog. And even though it sits atop of your head, it's really expensive to run it. And so to be on like that continuously in a trial is really draining. It's really draining, as evidenced by how many calories it actually burns. The same in a race. So when you're in a race and you start to get depleted in terms of glucose in your system, the first things that goes is your cognition. And all of a sudden you can't remember what mile you're at and all that kind of thing. And that's just like, uh-oh, I better get a gel pack on board or get a squirt of Gatorade. So a couple things we know. I'm curious about you folks, and if you could fill up the chat box with this. Let's just pretend at 7 p.m. that you're able to say, that was hardly a waste of time at all. I'm actually kind of really glad I sat in on this thing. What do we have to get done between now and 7 p.m. for you to actually be able to say that? If you could stick some of those ideas in the chat area, then we'll go ahead and address those things. And I would say one other thing. Here we are in two-dimensional Zoom land. It's okay to be interactive. So if I say something that you agree with or like, you can give me some kind of sign. If you say something that I dislike or you disagree with, you can likewise give me some other kind of sign. And I don't know if there's cross-cultural differences here, but in the US, that means like no good or something like that. So anyway, it's okay to show your sentiment about this. Yeah. So my oldest brother is a retired prosecuting attorney in California. And he and I would go on these hiking trips or camping trips or fishing trips. And we would have these compare and contrast discussions about compare and contrast working with a jury or working with a judge and working with an endurance athlete. And he would talk to me about, well, we do this in the legal profession. What do you do? And so some of what I know it has to do with listening to my oldest brother about how he actually gets stuff done. And one of the things he talked about was about being in a trial, about getting really exhausted. And part of the exhaustion came from not being able to sleep very well. And his situation was he would be able to go to sleep fine in the evening because he's really tired, but he would wake up in the night and not be able to return to sleep. Has any of you ever experienced that? Is that a kind of a usual thing? That's yeah. Yeah,
we've got a question in the chat box, in fact, saying how to push through even though you're exhausted.
Yeah. So one of the things to push through is what we'll get to in a minute is to try to limit the exhaustion. And one of the things to limit the exhaustion is to try to get as much sleep as you can. That's useful. So if any of you have had, part of you had this thing where you go to bed exhausted, but then you wake up in the night and your mind is racing, you can't get back to sleep, there are a couple things that endurance athletes do about this that might be useful, not quite sure. But one of them is if you are up in the night and you can't get back to sleep, one of the easiest things to do, I know it sounds kooky, but it kind of is you close your eyes and you roll your eyes back up in your head as hard as you can and hold them there for as long as you can. Don't do it now if you're operating heavy equipment or driving somewhere, because that would be a bad idea. But try it tonight if you get a chance, you wake up in the night. It's very simple. You close your eyes, you roll your eyes back up in your head as far as you can, as hard as you can, and hold it there for as long as you can. And it won't be something where you're all of a sudden getting drowsy. You will just wake up like 90 minutes or several hours later saying, what the hell just happened here? It works really well. But sometimes it doesn't work because you have things that you're trying to work out. For example, you have a closing argument coming up that you're trying to write, and your brain is thinking about different ideas. And in that case, how many of you keep a pad and pencil by the bed at night so that when these ideas hit you, you can jot them down and get back to sleep? Some people do that. I see a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Some people do that where an idea might come to you and say, I don't want to forget it. So in order to remember it, you just jot it down. Then you can easily go back to sleep about it. And some of you may have had this happen too, where you're laying in bed at night and you're working out the whole closing argument or how you're going to pitch to the judge a motion or something like that. And then you think you've got it all worked out. I was getting ready to give a big speech once, and it came to me during the night what I should say, and I scribbled down all these notes. And the next morning in my handwriting, there was this page of notes that somebody must have come into my room at night and exchanged my notes with these notes, which were complete rubbish and gibberish. And I had no idea. I kind of took my notes and said, like, you know, what is going on here? So but at least I got back to sleep, even though what I thought I worked out wasn't brilliant at all, and I had to kind of toss it out. But one thing to do if you just can't get back to sleep is write some of those notes down. And if that doesn't work, sometimes you just have to get up for a half hour and work it out. Get up for a half hour, do what you need to do, get that thing done, and then get permission from yourself. You ask that part of you that's keeping you up, you say, now, may we continue this in the morning? And ask that part for permission. And sometimes it says, oh, sure. And then you can kind of go back to sleep. Those are some things that endurance athletes use to try to manage the sleep, which is really key. You know, the last thing that Beatrice is talking about recovery is in endurance sports, no one gets more fit while they're exercising. You don't actually gain fitness while you're working out. You gain fitness after the workout when your body recovers from the workout and it recovers fitter and faster and stronger. So the recovery periods are key. And if you don't recover, you can't gain fitness. I think it might be similar in your profession where unless you take those breaks where you actually let your brain recharge, your brain being an energy hog, it's impossible to sort of get ready for the next part. So being able to get adequate sleep is the purest and best form of recovery. It really works. Yeah. And this question about how to push through when you're really tired, there's a couple things about that. One of the things we know for sure is that when you get depleted in terms of blood sugar, that goes straight to your cognition and your ability to actually think clearly. So fueling yourself properly is really key. And Beatrice talked about this before about, you know, when in a trial, preparing for a trial, she's eating like an endurance athlete because your brain is burning a lot of calories when you think. It's why we have so many mental shortcuts that we do so we don't have to think all the time. Like when you're driving to an intersection, there's this stack of lights in the intersection, they have different colors. Well, no longer do you have to say, like, what is that all about? What am I supposed to do here? You just have this mental shortcut where you know what it's all about and you can kind of go on an automatic pilot. So one of the things about being able to push through is make sure you're actually fueled. And I don't know if I remember reading something about Israeli parole board study some years ago, where these Israeli parole judges cases would come before them about recommending or not recommending parole, and they watched how the judges judged on this, and it was in the morning, approve, 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 and then towards lunch, deny, 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 deny. And after lunch, it was approve, 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 and toward the end of the day, it was deny, 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 in the request for parole. And they controlled for all sorts of things: recidivism, gender, ethnicity, appearance, all kinds of things. When it came down to it, was blood sugar, where these parole judges, as they got depleted blood sugar, they got more and more grumpy and less inclined to actually parole people. And so it's something to look for you in your own trial performance, to make sure you're topped off, but also you can anticipate that the judge perhaps and the jury maybe are going to be in different phases of acceptance and grumpiness where they are in their own blood sugar cycles. And if you want to try something a little risky, do it right after lunch, but before the postprandial letdown sets in, would be before they become drowsy. So there are times you can think about. And in a race, you know, you can anticipate. I don't know if any of you watch like the Tour de France on TV, but right before the end of the race, where it's about 20 minutes out and they're going to have the big sprint at the end, they're all chugging gels, energy gels, to get ready for the thing they need to have in a few minutes. And it takes a few minutes for the glucose to actually get into your system once you've put it in. So that's one of the things about pushing through, is make sure you're topped up and don't get behind on your calories. Yeah. Another thing about pushing through has to do with actually having a mental picture about what the finish line looks like. So when you go into a trial, let's just say today there's going to be some motions you're going to present. You could ask yourself to make a picture, what if this actually goes perfectly and the judge responds exactly the way we wish he would or she would? What does that actually look like? And you make a little mental movie in your head of the judge saying, you know, approve your motion, or whatever they would say about that. And you kind of make a picture of that. And then you say, okay, does that look just right to me? If not, you tune it up to make it look just right. And then you say, okay, that's what we're shooting for. And it gives you confidence it might go that way. A parallel on a race would be, what if today's race goes as well as I can possibly expect? What would that look like? And I might make a little home movie in the privacy of my own head in color of the race just going fine. I come, you know, swim straight lines and don't miss any of the buoys and go to the wrong direction. Come out of the water and get on my bike and, you know, ride the curve straight, and then have a good run where the second half of my run goes faster than the first, and cross the finish line. And you just make this little movie in your head. There's a spot in your brain called Brodmann's area. It's right here, a little above your eyebrow line and right in the center line. And that's the spot in your brain where your brain stores memories of things that have not yet taken place. Memories of things that have not yet happened, which I know is a kind of a crazy notion, but we do this all the time. And there's a couple ways to do it. One way you can do it about making pictures of the thing that you wish would happen the way you'd like it to happen. Another way to do it is what people call catastrophizing. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, other people do this, is they say, oh, I know when I get out there, I'm going to have a flat tire and the car is going to be out of petrol and there's going to be a big traffic jam and the store is going to be out of milk when I get there. And it might even be closed. And they like make this whole movie in their head of how awful things are going to be. Well, Brodmann's area, once you install things there, if your brain is a patterning system that's looking for cues that for you to be able to predict the near future, then if your brain is looking for all these terrible things, it will find them. And once it starts to find them, it says, see, I told you, this is all going wrong. And that's kind of the death spiral. So one way to do it is to catastrophize. I'll talk about more about that in a second. But the other way is to say, well, what happens if what does it look like in my mind's eye if this goes perfectly? And you make that movie and say, okay, great, the judge might do this, the judge might do that. This is what I'm looking for, I hope. And then your Brodmann's area starts looking for those cues. Now, this doesn't mean you can just think your way into, winning a case or winning a trial. You do actually have to prepare for all those things that might go wrong. So what if the judge does rule the wrong way? What would I do about that? The race parallel would be, in a race like this, what happens if I get on my bike and I get a flat tire? Well, can I make a little picture in my mind's eye of how I would get off, pull off the wheel, take the tire off, pull out that tube, put in a new tube, pump it up, put it back on the bike and ride away. It's like, okay, I got that eventuality covered if it happens. And you can think about the different ways things might go off the rails or off track, but then you always want to clean it up with, but how do I want my race to really go? If I made a movie in my mind's eye of the perfect race the way I can have it, what does that look like? And leave that to be the last thing. So that's another way to push through things, is by preparing ahead of time about how you want it to look. And then if there are the hard bits, you've already rehearsed them in your head and say, well, that's okay. I dropped the water bottle on the bike. I'll just get the next one. That's kind of not a hard thing. Yeah. Another thing that we might have in common here is about being nervous before an event. I don't know if any of you have gone into court and you've just really had that feeling in the pit of your stomach or sort of lower abdomen about, in the United States, they call it butterflies in your stomach. Is that a common thing for people going to court? Yeah, yeah. It happens with races too. Sometimes people are really nervous ahead of time, nervous the night before, and nervous the morning of, and to the point where sometimes you might actually be a little shaky or just have that icky feeling. Yeah, yeah. So part of the nerves can go away if you do the mental rehearsal that we just talked about, okay, let's just say this goes perfectly. What does that look like? And then say, okay, if it doesn't go perfectly, what are those things that might go wrong, and rehearse those. And then part of your nervousness is, well, I think I'm pretty prepared, so I don't really have a reason to be nervous. And a lot of those nerves will naturally dissipate if you do this imagery ahead of time about what it would really look like going forward. But there is another kind of strange and goofy technique about dealing with nerves. And there is a model in psychology about, you have some observation of the world, like you smack your knee on a piece of furniture, and you get this sensory input of pain. And then it sends signals to your brain, and your brain makes an evaluation about what you just sensed, like, ow, that hurts. And that goes to an emotion that's sort of appropriate to the thing about, you dummy, well, why did you do that? You get embarrassed about, hitting a piece of furniture or something like that. Or you step on a piece of ice and you feel the slipping, and your brain says, oh, this is going to be bad. And then you have the emotion of fear, like, I'm going to hit the ground in a second, it's going to hurt. And so they used to think that what you have to do then is reverse this about, well, first, try to set aside the emotion and then talk to your brain about it's okay. But there's a quicker way about getting around all this stuff, and you go straight for the physical sensation. So the last time you were nervous about appearing in court or meeting with a client or something, or the next time, if I could ask you to go ahead and remember what that's like and see if you can conjure up that icky feeling of being nervous or apprehensive or something like that. So if I could ask you to do that now by remembering a recent time you had that, tell me when you have a sort of an icky feeling. I'm going to get you out of it, so don't worry about this. But tell me when you have something like that. Okay, a few, yeah. Okay, good. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. First thing is, I want you to notice where it is in your body, the precise center of this icky feeling, the sensation, like it feels hot, it feels heavy, something like that. So notice where the center of it is. And then I'm going to ask you some very strange questions about it that you can answer to yourself. First of all, what color is this feeling? All right. Once you have a sense of the color, I'm asking for dimensions of the feeling, size and shape. Is it spherical? Is it flat like a frisbee? Is it have raggedy edges? What actually size and shape is it? You have size and shape and color and where it's located in your body. And then what's its temperature compared to body temperature? It's warmer than, it's the same as, or it's cooler than. You've got where it is, dimensions, color, and temperature. And then the last question, second to last question is, what is its density compared to? Is it dense like wood? Is it dense like lead? Is it light like a marshmallow? What's the kind of density? And then which direction is it rotating in? It's either rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. And if you say, well, it's not rotating at all, just guess, if it were to be rotating, which way is it going? And then finally, intensity of this feeling. On a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is, I can't really detect any sensation here, and 10 is, it's as intense as it could possibly be. On a 0 to 10 scale, how intense is the feeling that you feel right now? This thing that you have the location, you've got the dimensions, you have the color, you have the temperature, and you have the density, and you have the direction of rotation. How intense is the feeling 0 to 10 scale? I'll write all that stuff down. Now here's what you do with it. As kooky as that all is, here's the really kooky thing. Let it float out of your body to some place where you can see it. And whichever way it was spinning before, rotate it in the opposite direction as fast as you can, like 3,000 RPM, like it was in a blender. And rotate it as fast as you can for as long as you can till it just jets off somewhere. And tell me when it's gone. Okay, was there anybody there who got a substantial reduction in the, if you think about it now, 0 to 10 of intensity, what's it like now? Intensity to 10 in terms of the intensity of the feeling. Did anybody get a reduction in doing that? It sounds really crazy, this thing, but it tends to really work. We have all these physical sensations in our body connected to our emotions. And instead of going through all the cognitive psychology of dealing with your emotions and having this conversation in your head, you just go find the icky feeling and spin it down the other way. Nobody has, the good news is nobody has to know you're doing this. You can do this in the privacy of your own mind in a few seconds, in a short break. And one of the things that really helps with this afterwards, when you're done with it, is to take 2 or 3 really deep breaths. Take a big inhale and let it out, and take a big inhale and let it out. There's an old Gestalt psychologist, Fritz Perls, who said, fear is excitement without breathing. And so if you stop breathing, what you feel is fear. When you start breathing again, it translates it from fear into excitement. So the get out of jail free card, to use a Monopoly analogy, whenever you're feeling kind of icky feeling, is take a couple, 3 really good inhales and exhales. That will put you on a good plane. The other thing, in addition to this spinning feelings pattern, is to smile. Now, when you smile, there's 33 muscles involved in your face to do that. And when you smile, it actually releases hormones into your system that promotes a feeling of well-being. You may not actually be any better off. You may not actually have any more well-being, but your body feels as though you do. Now, of course, in a courtroom, timing your smile is going to be important. You could smile at the wrong time and have this be not taken very well, I would say. So, you know, if the opposing counsel objects to something and you have a big grin on your face, the judge might wonder what, in fact, you're actually thinking about. So you may be able to time it, but being able to push through depends a little bit on sort of not being so nervous, and not being so nervous depends on being prepared, and then doing your imagery rehearsing. If this goes perfectly, what does it look like in my mind? So I run that little movie of yourself in there. And then also, if you feel nervous in the morning, you can take a couple deep breaths. Let that out, do another one. That feels a lot better. and then you can smile at the right time. Like that feels a lot better. And then if you really need to, you can do this spinning feelings pattern. Identify the location of the feeling, figure out what color it is, what temperature it is, what density it is, which way it's rotating. Let it float out so we can see it. Change the color to some other color, which I neglected to say before, and then spin it in the opposite direction as fast as you can for as long as you can, and just knock that sensation down. One of the professional triathletes I worked with on this was so nervous before the races that he couldn't eat the night before, he couldn't sleep the night before a race, and he couldn't eat his breakfast the morning of because he was nauseous and would throw up. That's not a good idea when you're doing a race that's going to take 9 or 10 hours to go into it with no fuel and no ability to put fuel on. So we did this spinning feelings pattern with him, and he took it down to where it was a 0, but he didn't like it at a 0. It was a 10 before and went down to a 0. He didn't like a 0 because it was a race and he wanted to be a little keyed up for the race. So we spun it back up to 1.5 where he liked it, and we left it right there. So when you do this spinning feelings pattern, if you're going into an important event in the courtroom, maybe you don't want to take it to a 0 and be perfectly flat. You might want to leave it at 1 or 1.5 or 2, just to be like, I'm in court. You want to be keyed up just a little bit. So I don't really have a halo. That's not me. That's just the sun coming through a window. I'm going to try to organize this a little bit better. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's not good. There. Yeah. So those are a couple things you can do to help kind of manage things and to push through by being fueled properly, by prepared by this mental rehearsal about how you want it to go, and then to take care of the nerves coming up. Those are a few things that are coming up. Beatrice, do we have any other questions in the chat box that we ought to get to here? If I could ask you to report.
Yeah, yes, Will. There's we have a couple that I'd like to put to you. First of all, how do you cultivate a mindset for endurance? Do you have any practical techniques that you can recommend?
Well, I do actually, and one of them has to do with actually doing your training, and the training for the distance that you want to do in a race. If it's a 100-yard dash, you train differently from if it's a mile, and you train differently from if it's a mile, if it's a marathon. And you might feel like your trials are marathons. If you're just going in for a quick motion with a judge, that's preparing that, it's kind of a different intensity and duration of thing than if you're going in for a 2-week trial or something like that. And to cultivate the mindset for that is really about, when you do your training, one of the things to think about in your training is that you're actually building that patience and that stick-to-itiveness and endurance to actually carry out what's going forward. So it's not just that you're on the bicycle, that you're running, but you're actually spending the time doing this that it takes to get prepared for it, so that when you come to your event, you know what that kind of time block feels like, and you know how to pace yourself and what the expectations are. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in a training bout or something where I thought it was going to end, but something happened. My brother, my wife, and my brother's daughters, identical twin nieces, age 24, we did a run a year ago in the Grand Canyon in Arizona in the United States. The Grand Canyon is about it's about 20 miles across, which is like 38K or something like that, and it's about 1,600 meters down to the bottom. And we ran from the north rim down to the bottom where the Colorado River is, and up to started at the south rim, down to the river, up to the north rim, and then back. It was 48 miles total, which is, I don't know how many kilometers, a lot. And with about 18,000 feet of up and down, which is a lot. And I was wearing my Garmin device, my satellite wristwatch thing. And by the time we're coming back up, running up out of this 5,000 foot deep canyon, it was pretty dark towards the end. And my watch said 44 miles. And then it said 45 and 46 and 47. And I'm thinking, we only have 1 mile to go. I'm like, this is great. You know, we have 1 mile to go. We've been out there for like 15 hours running and running and running. Well, actually, then we got to a sign that said South Rim, 5 miles. I realized I didn't have 1 mile to go. I had 5 miles to go. And all of a sudden, I just kind of, you know, you're getting ready to be done with 1 mile to go. That's another 12 minutes or something. And then all of a sudden, it's 5 more miles to go. And I didn't actually have a little hissy fit where I stamped my feet and threw a fit, but almost. And so I asked my nieces, I said, well, okay, what do we have to do to get out of here? And they just said, keep going. You know, it's like, but I had to kind of do a recalibration about, okay, now I have to get my mindset about 5 more miles. And so if you kind of know where things are going to end, you can pace yourself there, but you could get surprised with in court with a continuance, or I don't know, they bring in a new witness or something like that. So you have to sometimes be prepared to actually recalibrate your endurance mindset about what's necessary to go forward, yeah, for the next part. Yeah. It's a crazy thing we do, yeah.
Will, there's another question from the chat box, which it sounds like you might be able to talk about. It's how do you give up when you think that all, how do you not give up, sorry, when you think that all is lost?
Yeah, well, assuming that all is not lost, and you just think it might be, there's a couple things that some athletes do sometimes, and one of them is think about who in your life you would never, ever, ever, ever want to disappoint. It could be a live person, it could be somebody who's passed on, it could be a fictitious character, it could be somebody you met, somebody you read about, a family member or coach, something like that, law school professor, whatever. But if you think about somebody who would never, ever, 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 ever want to disappoint, if you conjure up that person right then and said to them in your mind's eye, this is obviously, you know, made up, fictitious, okay, give me some advice about what I need to do to not give up. They would say some words of encouragement to you if you pick the right person. And then say, okay, well, I never really want to disappoint this person, and here's what she or he would tell me to keep going. Then you hear that and then pick up and carry on. A fellow I know does this Hawaii Ironman World Championship race every year. He is 73 years old. And the run part is really difficult. It's really hot there. And the run portion is really hilly, and it's very humid, and it's windy. So, and the sun beats, it's just, again, we pay money for this, non-compos mentis, but anyway, and what we did with him on the run course is figure out where the most difficult parts of the run course are going to be. There's a big hill that you have to climb out from the beach up to the highway. And there was a couple places around mile 20, everybody gets really tired on the run. So in his mind's eye, we took the course map and we put individual places on the run course where it was going to be most difficult for him, an imaginary resource. So in one place, his deceased father was going to be there and saying, "I'm really proud of you. I know you could do this," and something like that. He put like all dogs from his childhood in different places on the race course, so that mentally when he got to that place, like there was Fido running along with him. And of course, you're hallucinating anyway by that time in a 14-hour race, so it doesn't feel that strange. But that's what he did to help him not give up, is elicit people from his life and dogs that he knew would give him a little bit of a boost. And what would they say to him that would help him not give up? And he implanted that in his mind, again, in Brodmann's era. So he got to that part of the race course, and there they were, and they popped up. So I don't know if that's helpful. And I think this is getting weirder and weirder, but anyway, some of the things that happen.
Were you able to see if it actually worked? Were you able to see by looking at his times or anything like that, whether he did actually pick up the pace at that stage?
Well, that's actually a pretty good question. And it turned out to be true, because coming up from the beach at the Energy Lab up to the Queen K Highway is where he was in second place at the bottom, but he in his age group was in first place at the top of the hill, and he actually won his age group that year, which is, it's the world championship. To win your age group in the world championship is a real thing. So the other thing about not giving up is the 70% rule. And I do not know if this applies to what you all do, but in these races, especially the longer ones, people tend to lose focus about 70% of their way through the event. So let's just say it's an Olympic distance triathlon, which Alistair and Johnny Brownlee, two British fellows who are the best in the world at this, world champions, you know, gold and bronze medalists. So it's a mile swim, it's a 25-mile, you know, 40K bike, and then a 10K run. It takes those guys a little under 2 hours to do this. And so at about 70% of the course of the race, people tend to lose focus. They're starting to get fatigued, and they're also starting to get tired of doing this, like kind of bored, sort of. And it's not close enough to the finish line where they can, like the horse can smell the hay in the barn on the way back. It's not close enough to the finish line where you get that incentive to, let's get this over with. But it's far enough into the race, you're starting to get tired physically and mentally. So at 70% of the way through, some people will start to slow down and they have a little bit of a lapse, a little bit of a dip in their pace before they pick it up towards the finish. Smart athletes will figure out how they're going to replenish themselves at that 70% mark. And if they can keep their pace, they will put time into the field and they will pass their competitors who are kind of losing focus and slowing down. Maybe there is a parallel in what you do about 70% of the way through, you know, a difficult trial or something. You can expect everybody getting tired. The judge is tired, the jury's tired, opposing counsel's tired. If you can come through and shine through that part, you might be able to actually make some gains there. And the way you do that is plan for it, make sure you're fueled and hydrated, and also say, okay, I know the 70% point's coming up. I'm going to be strong through that and plan, imagine, you know, visualize yourself going through that part really strongly. So again, I'm not sure how applicable that is to what you do, but maybe there's a parallel there. Can't quite say.
No, I definitely think so. I think that you're right. You can feel the energy in the courtroom sort of leaking a bit. And if you can be the person who drives energy back in, then that's definitely a good thing. Will, there's a question that I wanted to ask you that, and a similar one from the chat box. What I wanted to ask you was about losing focus and putting disappointment to one side. Let me tell you where it comes from. From the age of about 14 to 23, I used to do heptathlons, which would be a 7 event over a weekend, over a Saturday and Sunday. And when I used to compete in the heptathlon, it was really important to put aside any underperformance or any disappointment arising from underperformance in a single event in order that you could just focus on doing your best for the remainder of the event. So if the high jump went badly, which is the second event, it's just no good having that ruin the rest of the Saturday's, you know, the shot put and the 200 meters. So what can you, and similarly in trials, it's a bit of a roller coaster. So do you have any advice about how to recover from something that just really didn't go well and to be able to pull your focus back into what's coming ahead rather than constantly sort of beating yourself up about what's gone wrong? And if I can just finish with the question in the chat box, which is similar, is how to get your focus back if you've sort of got bogged down and have lost it. So I don't know if you've got any advice for us on those points.
These endurance events, especially the longer ones, like a half marathon or a marathon or a half Ironman distance race or an Ironman distance triathlon, which is the 140.6 miles total, nothing goes perfectly. It's just too long an event. There's too many variables in there where there's no such thing as a perfect race. Something's going to go off the rails a little bit. And so to be able to come back with that. And so, Beatrice, the way you framed this in the beginning is what I want to exactly say is you say, put it aside. So some people will take that bad patch and they'll put it to the side. Other people will put the bad patch and they'll put it behind them. And these are not just figures of speech, it's where they're actually taking that memory, probably a visual memory, and actually moving it around in their space. So right now you could think about something that went wrong with a client in a courtroom or something like that. If you make a little picture of it, where is it most useful? You want to take that picture, and we all know how we can take a picture and make it bigger or pinch it down, make it smaller. You take that memory of a thing, okay, this just happened, okay? You take, in your mind's eye, get a picture of it, make it smaller, and take and put it where it's not necessary anymore. Over to the side for some people works. I'm just going to move it to the side for now. For a lot of people, they put it behind them. The memory's there, and you won't lose any wisdom you got from making the mistake because it was expensive learning. You want to make sure you keep the learning in mind, and it's not, you're not getting rid of it. You're just putting it somewhere back there where it's behind me now. I was in a race, this was an Olympic distance race, and I made a mistake that cost me a little bit of time. And a part of me was, my internal chatter was like, you should know better than that. I was a rookie mistake and all this stuff. And I said to myself, I understand. Would you mind if we talked about this on the other side of the finish line? I was saying this to myself while I'm running. And I said, okay. And I said, great, well, we'll talk about it then. And then I concentrated this. But then when I crossed the finish line, this other part was like, meh, 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 meh. I said, I know, come on, you're right. Let's just have it. So one thing you can do is literally take the memory of the event as a image in your head and move it physically someplace where it's no longer bothering you. Set it aside, move it to the back. Another thing you can do, if it's less of a picture and more of internal chatter where you're kind of beating yourself up, you can do a couple things. One, say, can we postpone this till later where we can have this conversation? You're talking to yourself in your mind's eye and your mind's ear. Nobody has to know. That's one way. Another way is, you know, all these devices now that we listen to things on, they have either a knob that you can turn the volume up and down, or they have a slider where you can turn the volume up and down. Another thing you can do when you're having negative internal chatter that's unhelpful is just turn the volume down. Say, that's fine, and just sliding it down, and you say, I'm sorry, I can't hear you right now. Just turn it down. A third thing you can do is kind of alter the quality of the sound. Have any of you ever breathed in from a helium balloon and try to then talk afterwards? Have you ever done this or seen this done? So imagine this really nasty voice telling you all these things that are not helpful at that time. And first you have it breathe from a helium balloon. And then it gets to tell you what it has to tell you. So this thing might say, oh, you're such an idiot. But when it sounds like Minnie Mouse, and you say, oh, whatever. And it's really hard to take it seriously. So those are some other things you can do in the moment to try to get things going. And the last thing I would say about this has to do with the title of our talk today, which is Find a Way. So you can ask yourself, okay, that all happened over there, but what can I do right now in this minute, right now, to find a way to be successful? What do I have to do right this minute? When you ask yourself that question, it reorients your time from that thing that happened back there that's past, for what do I have to do right this minute? And it puts you in the present time to think about what can I execute right now to go forward. So those are a few things, kind of a mismatch of, again, crazy, goofy ideas to manage a disappointment. Now, there was a chat that came up that's really important I want to recognize is, if you do make a deal with the part of you that says, you know, you did this bad thing or made this mistake, and if you say, can we talk about it later, then you actually have to do consider it later at a time that's more convenient and say, okay, great, I know I made this mistake. What can I learn from this that I could apply next time? And that's what that part of you that's chewing you out for making a mistake is trying to do, is don't do it again. And what do you have to learn to actually be prepared to avoid that next time, or not have that happen? So if you do ask it to postpone it to another time or another place beyond the finish line, then you actually owe it to yourself to have that conversation with that other part. So good catch on that. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple of nutrition related questions that our audience would like to ask. First of all, it's about what to eat. What food would you recommend during trial? Would you recommend pasta, which may unfortunately make you feel a bit sleepy? Or do you think protein bars are a good solution? What are your thoughts on that? And then the second question is, would you recommend drinking an energy drink, for example, just before you go back in after lunch to combat any afternoon slump? What are your thoughts on those?
I confess, I don't think I have a good solid answer about this. In terms of the physiology about how to prepare for a race, we know how to do that. The physiology is really clear. I mean, there's some polishing on the edges here, but we know how to actually train people and how much long, slow endurance work they should do, how much high, fast sprinting they should do, how many hours you need to train a week, and how to peak for a race over time by building up the amount of endurance you do. That stuff is kind of figured out. The sports psychology, still a lot of things to be figured out. I think that the sports nutrition stuff is still being figured out, and I would say the answer is, what answer do you want? I can find a study that supports it. What do you want me to tell you? But there's a couple things we do know, is that simple sugars like sucrose and fructose, they have a quick burn and then they flare out. And what they tend to do if you take on a lot of sugar is you have a big peak and then a big crash. In the crash, you get lethargic and maybe even jittery. I don't know if you've had that, where you had a big sugar came on and then 40 minutes later, you're just really kind of raggedy. So I don't, unless you're in the middle of a race and the simple sugars, you're just burning through them like crazy. I'm not a big proponent of those things. There are some things you can do to moderate that, and a little bit of fiber in your diet will actually slow down some of the absorption of some of these sugars and smooth out your glucose rate, because glucose is related to insulin, and insulin is what controls your blood sugar. So if you have a big bunch of sugar that comes on, you have a big insulin rush, which knocks your blood sugar down, and then you're in a big valley there. So I think this sounds so simplistic, and it's what your grandmother told you is a good balanced diet. And also, some people are of the opinion that if you have a steady input of calories throughout the day, it's better than having big meals. Especially a big lunch meal, it tends to actually generate the postprandial letdown, where I know this has never happened to you, but you've seen other people in court or in a meeting where about 40 minutes after lunch, they're just really struggling to stay awake. This never happened to you, of course, but you have noticed it in other people. And they're really struggling to stay awake, and you just watch this, and it's kind of heartrending to watch. So a big lunch is likely to attend to that. And also you can anticipate it might be happening for yourself. And so a little snack about 40 minutes out can help sort of relieve that. And then again, also there's going to be another kind of letdown towards the end of the day. So a couple little snacks. And you mentioned about protein bars. I kind of like the protein bars a little bit because they tend to have less sugar and a little bit more fiber, because the protein bars often have nuts in them, which are good and kind of fibrous and that kind of thing. So a little bit steady, but an energy drink, I don't know, because you're going to get the boost, but then you may also get the crash on the other side. So I'm not sure. I don't really have a good sense on this. I'm kind of watching the sports nutrition wars that are going on now among the low fat, the low carbohydrate, high fat people. versus the paleo people versus the primal people versus the carbohydrate people. There's this big kind of fist fight going on right now, and it's fun to watch from the sidelines, and I'm waiting to see who's going to win. I know for me personally, I do really well on a high fat, low carbohydrate diet. And if I get enough fat in the morning in a breakfast with, you know, plenty of butter or something like that, and, you know, some eggs or something, I do really well. If I have a high carbohydrate breakfast, I never catch up all day. I'm hungry all day, and I just have this, you know, spike and valleys, spike and valleys. That's just me personally. And you might have to experiment on your own to see what works best. Also, there is a compound called caffeine, and I'll just leave that there. Yeah.
Will, it's really nearly time for us to finish up, but I wondered, we've got one last question that I wondered if we could sneak in before I say thank you to you. The last question refers back to catastrophizing. And what you're asked is, how does one stop catastrophizing? Because it can become such a mental habit when preparing for court. So what advice do you have for people that simply keep doing it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a really good one. And you can't actually eliminate it. You can only replace it. And if I were to say to you, don't think about the judge being really mad at you. What did you just do? You just made a picture of the judge being really mad at you. Like don't think of, you know, a flat tire on your car. Well, what did you just do? You just made a picture of a flat tire. So what you can do with the catastrophizing is say, what's the lesson in here? Okay, if this happens, what would I do? And use it for planning about the eventuality. And then you say, okay, great. That all could happen, and I'm prepared if any of that happens. But right now I'm going to set that aside, or I'm going to put it back here and say, what do I wish would happen? If this turns out as well as it possibly, what does that actually look like? And make that movie in your head and leave that as the last thing. The catastrophizing was useful. It got you prepared for what you needed to do in case these things go wrong. But that's not what we want to have go wrong. What we want to install in Brodmann's area is a movie in your head of things going as well as they possibly can. And that's the last thought. If the catastrophizing starts to come back in, say, that's all fine, but how do I want it to go? What's my desired future event? And that's the movie you want to do at the end. And after a while, with a little bit of practice, the part of you that's catastrophizing just only wants you to be prepared. So if you do that preparation, then you say, okay, that's fine, we're on notice. Help me with what we want to have happen. A lot of times the catastrophizing part will come over and say, oh, and don't forget this good thing. So that's my advice about catastrophizing, is you just replace it with the positive, you know, desired movie that you want to have go forward.
Will, thank you so much. It's sadly now nearly 7 o'clock with us, so I'm afraid it's time to wrap up. We unfortunately can't give you a round of applause, but can I ask everyone to thank Will by sticking their thumbs up, because it was an absolutely brilliant talk. It was really entertaining, as well as stuff full of useful ideas. And I'm sure that I'm not the only person that can't wait to try out some of these. So thank you ever so much indeed, Will, and please stick your thumbs in the air. Thank you.